Hello and welcome to another episode of Bare Bones Wargaming, a show with no bells, no whistles, no frills, just a man, a camera, and his game. Today's episode, boom, 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 boom. That's right, it's time for the Bare Bones Wargaming opinion time, and you know what that means. Wah, wah, wah. Wah, wah, wah. Dun 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 dun, hoo ha he ha. Dun 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 dun, dun dun dun, dun 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 dun. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. All right, now we're doing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And of course, Race to the Rhine by Phalanx Games. Okay. This game has been interesting. My wife tracked this down for me for my birthday. It was not easy to find, and it did cost a decent penny. But in the end, I'm very glad that she did. So let's just kind of get straight into it. You can watch my other video if you want to see how the game actually works and stuff. So, first of all, let's talk about the good. Lots of choices here to do. You really have a lot of decisions to make. You know, getting trucks, placing trucks, figure out which cores to move, which ways to go, where to place your German markers, where to do counterattacks, what you can do with the Germans if you have an opponent's space. Notice opponents, you can't do it to yourself. An opponent's space that is adjacent to a German space, and there's no friendly core next to that space. There's a lot of choices going on here. Not just the choices themselves, but also trying to figure out the best way to maximize those choices, what order to do things in. So a lot going on, a lot of decision making to be done in this game. This game will make you think and make you work, so to speak. I do like the combo of the military and the quartermaster aspects here. The balance to me is pretty good. Now, there are times that are very frustrating with this, whenever you can't get supplies up to your core, or your core is grounded because you don't have the food. But if you know anything about Patton was always complaining about not having enough gas, so that's not exactly an unrealistic thing. And that there was a time when the Germans were so disorganized and just in a complete panic. Kind of like the opening minutes and sequence of A Bridge Too Far. That, really was a race. You were outrunning, your supplies. Kind of like that famous scene in Patton where there's all those villagers around that American tank, and the one guy's like, hold it! Hold it! Hold it! And he's got to get everybody quiet and be like, where is this place on the map? I don't see it. And somebody else says, that's because we've run completely off the map. That's how quick they were moving and advancing at the time and stuff. So it is a good scenario for doing the kind of quartermaster supply kind of aspects of things, because that was a big part. Years ago when I did my student teaching, I had a student whose grandparents were raising him, and his grandfather was actually part of Patton's Red Ball Express, driving supplies all the way from Normandy up to the spearheads of Third Army. And he talked about that, and how the pontoon bridges were, and some of the trucks were weighted so heavy that when one truck would go across a section of the pontoon bridge, because of the weight, you'd have to wait for it to bounce back up, so to speak. You had to be careful so you didn't get pitched off the bridge and stuff. It was very interesting to listen to him talk about that his experiences in the logistical field. So this situation is kind of ideal for this, and I think the game does a nice job of really raising those issues and making you think about depots and which routes are you going to go, and making sure that everything isn't overburdened. I mean, if you don't think that overburdening is an issue, just again, not to bang a drum here, but watch A Bridge Too Far when they're talking about bringing up the boats to try and cross the river. It's one little tiny road that they're trying to take 30 core over, and it's just a nightmare. trying to bring things up and get them past the fighting formations, to get the supplies up there that they need. So, another thing I like about this that's good is the replay value. The replay value is fairly high with the individual decks, but if you, and again, kind of an optional or veteran rule, if you combine all the allied decks together, so, Patton, Bradley, and Montgomery don't have their own, then the replay value increases more, and quite frankly, I think the tension of the game increases, because it becomes more interesting as far as the interplay between the choices you're making, and then also the choices you're making to put down the German markers to block. It also helps too for solo play, because when you have all the decks combined and you see, who's racing ahead, or who got lucky and managed to get, capture fuel and ammo, you know where to put your markers. It makes it a little bit easier and obvious to put them down. So I like that too about it. The game definitely rewards planning too. I mean, this is a game that in some ways it's kind of like chess. You have to think ahead what you're going to do several turns, because you got to link all this together. When to time pulling the trucks to cause the supply interface and all those things. So I like that fact that it really does reward that planning aspect, with the emphasis on the quartermaster aspect of it too. And that's another thing about it too, is that this is a game, I said toward the end of my last video, this is a game that covers a very often neglected topic, which is logistics. There's that old famous saying about, amateurs talk about strategy and professionals talk about logistics. And it's very true. And there's not a lot of games like this that really focus and make you put on that hat of the quartermaster general and be like, holy smoke, 7th Corps all the way up here in the middle of BFE, and how am I going to get food up there because I just launched them on a narrow, spearhead. I didn't bring another corps up with them. Or, if you're bringing 2 corps together, how are you going to move fast enough so that somebody else isn't just boldly being like, you know what, I'm just going to try and use my corps and kind of leapfrog them, so to speak. Or a little hard to leapfrog in this game because you can't have 2 corps in the same space at the same time. But the idea of moving, one after the other like that, it's interesting, because you don't really see that in a whole lot of games. You don't really worry about logistics a whole lot, other than the standard, do I have supply, can I trace it to a depot, or that kind of thing. The only games I can think of off the top of my head that put so much emphasis on supply are, as I said last video, Joe Balkowski's The Korean War from Victory Games, came out in 1986, which, if I remember correctly, is being reprinted by Compass Games. But then also, it's a Barbarossa game, Storm in the East, which covers Barbarossa by White Dogs Games. Steven, forget his last name, designed it. But depots are very important there to link the chains and stuff. There's a lot of emphasis on logistics there as well too. So that game is a little more involved, and it's definitely more of a wargamer game. This is much more of a wargamer game light. And I'll get to that here in just a minute, what I mean by that. But I like the presentation of how it all works together and makes you think about logistics. All right, so that's the good. The bad. Let's talk about the bad. I don't like the medal system. It makes it feel a little gamey to me, and it makes it feel like Memoir 44. And to me, Memoir 44 is fun, but it's not a serious war game. It's like, if you just want to have fun and play a light game and have a good time and do some tactical stuff, and maybe even, teach your kids intro game to get them interested, Memoir 44 is fine. But if you really want to play something meatier, then you got to step up to like Conflict of Heroes, or if you really want to, if you want to go whole hog, so to speak, then you go up to ASL and stuff. So it just feels a little too gamey to me, because then your decisions are partly made on those medals, and in some ways it kind of undermines the logistical part of things. Maybe it would be a little different if there were certain lines, maybe on the map, or certain victory point cities that you needed to get to and stuff like that. Of course, then again, one could argue about having more competition, but you would have your boundaries between each of the army groups, so you'd have that consideration too. But it just feels a little gamey to me as well. Speaking of which, swapping the medals out for the airborne units. I mean, I can see it and I can't. On the one hand, I can see it because it's like using your prestige to basically get those airborne units deployed. But I don't know. I guess what I can't see is, okay, so I earned a medal for feeding civilians, and now I'm going to use that medal to get the airborne drop. That causal link is just kind of, making me have a Scooby Doo moment, like Reggie. It doesn't feel right, for lack of a better way to put it. Maybe with the airborne, there could be some kind of competition, between the commanders, or something else that could be done. Now, granted, one could argue that would make the game swing a little bit, but I don't know. Like I said, I see it and I don't, and it just kind of bugs me, for lack of a better way to put it. Yeah, it just doesn't quite feel right, I guess is what I'm trying to say, with the medals for the airborne, so to speak. Okay. Another thing that's bad, in my opinion, is the combat method. I understand why the combat method is the way it is. It's streamlined, makes it easy for anybody to play. But it's a bit too concise and too precise. Combat is messy business. That's why most games, you resolve it with some kind of chance factor. Like dice, or even like John Butterfield's designs, like the D-Day series and stuff. You still have to draw cards, to resolve the combat and figure out what happened, and go from there. So there's still that chance, because you never know what cards you're going to get. So again, it does make the game streamlined. It makes it easier to do, and it puts the focus on the supply aspect, which is where it should be. Excuse me, it's been a long day, but I don't know. It's too precise for me. I expect chaos in my war games. Now, granted, I guess you could argue that this is more of a Euro game than a war game, but I'm not convinced of that after having played it how many times now. Okay. Let's see. Another thing that can be a bad thing too is, I think, with the individual decks, since there's only 22 cards in each deck, if you've got somebody who's got a strong memory, they can do some card counting. They can be like, oh, well, I already ran into, there's for argument's sake, say 5 German divisions in the deck. Well, I already ran into, and defeated 4 of them, so I know there's not going to be more divisions coming, so I can take a chance. Maybe I won't send all the full supplies to this core. Maybe I don't need to do that step because, hey, I don't have too many captured supplies and stuff. So that, since there's only 22 cards, I think it lends itself to a little more card counting. It's much harder with the German deck, because the German deck not only has, of course, different units, some very strong units like panzer divisions and stuff, but also some basic infantry units. But well, I guess there's only 2 more of those. There's 24 Axis unit cards. But since you don't know which ones there are, unless of course you use your recon cards or you use your air power, it makes it harder to count, so to speak. So, yeah. And last but not least, of course, the ugly parts. There's 2 ugly things, I think, that go with this game. One is that, if somebody's losing and they got a bad card draw and stuff, you could throw the game by how you place your German markers. I mean, you could leave one area wide open. I mean, granted, now the other player could, put their marker down, but, if somebody's racing to the Rhine, and you're like, holy smoke, they're going to make it, and both of you are trying to block them, it makes it a much more different game than if only one of you is. If like one person's like, well, I'm going to place it over here because I'm just going to let them win because, I'm tired of playing this game. It didn't go so well. So that's one thing. The other thing that completely drives me crazy about this game, so much so that, as I showed you last time, and you can see from here, I'm using dice, is the food playing pieces are, for me, they're awful because they're so tiny. They're so slippery, too. That's the other thing. The guy with big fingers, I wear a size 16 ring. It's hard to get a hold of those things. That's why I went to the dice. The barrels and the ammo boxes aren't bad. The barrels can be a tiny bit tricky at times, but nothing compared to those. So now it does look like for Race to Moscow that they fixed that problem. They're using different pieces and stuff, and actually it looks like they're using more sculpted molds and stuff, which would be very cool. So, but that's the one thing right off the bat. As soon as I started playing this game, I was like, I have to come up with something else. I cannot. No. these things slipping out of my fingers and just have a hard time even getting a hold of them, and it was awful. So in the end, let's see, what does that give us here? A tally of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 good things, 4 bad things, and then 2 ugly. So what does that mean in the end? For me, what it means is the game is a keeper. I'm definitely going to play this from time to time. I'm glad my wife tracked it down. I'm glad, I know how much she paid for it. And even though it was a birthday gift, I know, because, I know. She got it off of Amazon, so, it's not hard to look up orders. But that being said, I do feel like it's been worth the money. I have enjoyed this. This has been interesting to me. Each time I played, I've done things a little differently, and I'll probably still try things a little differently in the future to see if there's a better strategy and stuff. And I guess the ultimate measure of any game is, are you having any fun with it? And I am having a lot of fun with this. I like the way that the cards are set up. I like the different things with it. The weather rule is obviously has an extra layer of realism, makes it a little more difficult. But I mean, this is a keeper for me. Now, how often it will hit the table, I could see using this as kind of like an in-between game, quite frankly. Not quite a light game, like the video I did on filler games. I wouldn't consider this a filler game, but I would consider this a lighter game. I mean, I've been playing this thing nonstop basically since my birthday, and I played about 1 game a day. So it does play quick. That is one thing too. I guess that's another thing you go in the good column is it does play very quick. It's fast, it's furious, and it is fun. So I mean, it does get the 3F rating, but with certain caveats. And to quote the genie from Aladdin, certain limitations, certain provisos. I mean, think of it this way. This game I would recommend if you're interested in the Western Front, if you're interested in logistics. But I also would kind of do, if you're a wargamer, I would also kind of do this like they did with Roger Maris's home run record for a number of years. I put an asterisk next to it because it's not going to be every wargamer's cup of tea. I mean, I could see where some wargamers would be like, yeah, there ain't enough meat here, man. There's just, this chicken's a bit thin. It's yeah. So from that standpoint, you could say it's not as engaging that way. However, again, that being said, I do like the topic. I do like the flow. I do like the presentation, except for, of course, the food markers. So, in the end, like I said, I mean, the real evaluation of a game is, to me anyway, if a game is really good, if you really enjoy a game, you will get it to your table at least once a year, minimally. Sometimes more often. And usually, when you pull it out, you do like multiple plays. So, from that standpoint, this is a winner. So much so that I am now really looking forward to Race to Moscow. Because, again, it's logistics, but it's a little bit of a different logistical animal. Because the challenge there is trying to keep the supplies as they race forward, but racing forward in a very different environment for one thing, especially infrastructure-wise. I mean, the infrastructure between, France and Russia is just, single A baseball versus Major League Baseball. So, the rulebook, I will say, is pretty clear overall. I had to check a couple of things on Board Game Geek on the threads, just to make sure. But it is a keeper for me. I like it. If you're interested in logistics, you definitely should take a look at this game. Try to get a copy. I don't know if they're going to be reprinting it anytime soon. But if they're not, and you are interested in the topic, then I think there's still a few days left to go on pledging it on Kickstarter for Race to Moscow. If that interests you. So I'll be curious to see what changes, what improvements they've made to the system between the two. That will be very interesting to see. So again, in the end, Bare Bones Wargaming, I do give this a thumbs up because I do think it's a keeper and I do think it's fun, even with the issues, for lack of a better way to put it. It's kind of like, this is a final thought, it's kind of like running the old wishbone offense. If you're going to run the wishbone, you have to be ready for some fumbles. That's just the nature of the beast. You got 3 guys plus the quarterback flying around with pitches and stuff. You have to be ready for fumbles. That's just kind of, it's like being a race car driver and expecting, blowouts every once in a while, or tire issues and stuff. It's going to happen. It's just part and parcel, so to speak. So you can look at it that way. But even with all of that, it is fun, and I do enjoy it. Okay, so next time I'm not sure what I'm going to do, because right now I'm working on a little side. Well, I'm working on playtesting still the Carrier Battle Philippines Sea, which is the sequel to Carrier. But I'm also working on a little project of trying to figure out and use games to game, what if, tomorrow being Pearl Harbor Day, what if the Japanese had caught, several carriers, or even ideally, what if they'd caught almost all the available carriers that were there, that were available, that existed. That's the word I'm looking for. The Lexington, Yorktown, Enterprise, Hornet, and Saratoga. What if they caught most of them at Pearl Harbor? It'll be interesting to see. And I'm trying to figure out a way to do that. I'm even looking at games as varied as Across the Pacific and Victory in the Pacific. So we'll see how that goes. And if anybody has any suggestions, I'd love to hear them in the comment section. Okay, so this has been Tim Korchmar with Bare Bones Wargaming, saying thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Actually, quite frankly, since today is already December the 6th, there's a good chance the next video that you see from me will be my best and worst, new to me, best and worst of the year. Because that seemed to get a very favorable response last year. And so I'll probably do that again this year and take a look at all the games that I played for the very first time here in 2019. As we get ready for a new decade, if you can believe that one. Alright, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.